my crowd, I'd whistle, but I won't do that. Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We are blessed to live in this great country handed down from previous generations, especially with the Artemis II launch last week and the landing of the crew today. And I want to say congratulations to all that were involved in that. And, you know, I can't tell you how much that inspired me when John Kennedy spoke those words back a long, long time ago. But they inspired me when he said we were going to the moon and coming back. So I'd be honored if you guys would stand up just real briefly, because we live in such a great country that has given so much to us and others. And let's say the Pledge of Allegiance. I got a flag here. You ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, justice for all. All right. Say a quick prayer. Please, Lord, watch over everybody here as they travel back and forth and bless this food to the nourishment of our body to serve your will. Amen. Y'all may be seated. Got to get my notes straight here. You can go ahead and start eating. Go ahead and start eating. That's the first thing. And I'm supposed to introduce myself. I'm Ted Yoho, and I'm a former member of Congress. I served for 8 years in Congress from 2013 to 2021. District 3, which I felt was the best district in Florida. It's a home of the University of Florida, so go Gators. Got to do that. And it was such an honor to be there. My background is I'm a veterinarian, practiced large animal veterinarian for 28 years, been married 51 years, and have 3 children. One's in the Coast Guard, one's a lawyer, and one's a clinical psychologist. And we live up in a little town called Wielaka, Florida. If anybody's not been there, come by, but don't stay. It's got about 800 people in there, and half a traffic light that works sometimes. But I'm thrilled to be here this afternoon, surrounded by people like you who care deeply about America's role in the world. And I think we can all agree that the last several years have shown just how interconnected and intertwined our security and prosperity are with the rest of the world. America's global leadership isn't a Democratic or Republican, conservative or liberal idea. It's an ideology that impacts all Americans. How we show up in the world is worth talking about at the kitchen table with our kids, our families, and at the local diners with our friends. This community right here is special. In this room are leaders, not just from the Space Coast, but across the state. People from big cities, small towns, students to employees and CEOs from Fortune 500 companies, military veterans and faith leaders. We're all able to come together for conversations like today's to find common ground about how America shows up in the world and why leading globally is critical to the security and prosperity of the Floridians, but also the nation here at home and abroad. I remember my first USGLC meeting that I got invited to. I came from the second wave of the Tea Party, if anybody remembers that, when I got elected. And I was in rooms and auditoriums, and I'd say, we're getting rid of foreign assistance, and everybody stand up and cheer. And I got up there, and I learned real quick how ignorant I was about what good foreign assistance is and what bad is. And I'm like, not all of it's good, not all of it's bad, but if we use it strategically and it's effective and it's efficient, it moves our security and our prosperity down the road and makes us all safer. And it was a meeting in Gainesville, and I had just entered a bill called the BUILD Act, which authorized a new agency. It got rid of one, the OPIC, Overseas Private Investment Corporation, but it created the United States International Development Finance Corporation, often referred or commonly referred to as the DFC. And I had constituents that were strong supporters, and they stood up and they said, you sold us out, you're a sellout, you become a liberal. And I had to listen, and I understood where they were coming from, but I said, wait a minute. If we've got a program that moves countries off of perpetual aid and moves them from aid to trade, would that be a good thing? And they said, yeah, I could do that. And so that's really what we did. And so after the meeting, people said, I don't like what you did, but I understand why, and we're going to support you. That's the value of being in an organization or around this kind of information that you're getting. It creates awareness, and if you have awareness, you're better informed, and you can talk about these things around the dinner table and those kind of things. It's now my pleasure to welcome USGLC's Carrie Campbell to the podium, and I'm going to step away, and she's going to carry it on from here. We've got comments.
Good afternoon, yes, good afternoon. Thank you all so much for being here. I am Carrie Campbell, the South Outreach Director for the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. I'm the one who's been emailing you all, and so I want to say thank you all for joining us here today, and a special thank you to our Florida Advisory Committee members who make this event possible. Congressman Yoho, we are so grateful and honored to have you as our Florida co-chair of our Florida State Advisory Committee, and thank you for being here. And of course, a special shout out and appreciation to our featured speakers, General Richard Newton, Joe Rice, and Congressman Herodopoulos. Before we do a little more detailed introduction of our speakers, I wanted to share a little bit about the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, who we are, what we do, and why we do it, in case you might not be familiar with us. So for over 30 years, we've brought together a nationwide, bipartisan coalition of political, military, business, civic, and faith-based leaders to make the case, as Congressman Yoho spoke about, for a robust, sustained American engagement in the world. And you only have to turn on the TV to see that today's era of global instability and transnational threats, strategic investments in diplomacy and international assistance are vital foreign policy tools for the United States. It prevents crisis, saves lives, counters rivals like China, and builds strong economic and security partnerships that help America win around the world. We're led by our National Advisory Council, which is chaired by Mike Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and it includes former secretaries of State, Defense, and Treasury from both Republican and Democratic administrations. And Admiral Mullen, along with the rest of USGLC's growing veteran community, understand better than most why it's far, far cheaper to prevent war than to actually fight a war. And that's why our National Security Advisory Council includes over 280 of our nation's most respected retired 3- and 4-star generals and flag officers, including Richard Newton, who we'll hear from today. This committee is led by former CENTCOM Commander General Anthony Zinni and recently retired SOUTHCOM Commander General Laura Richardson. And alongside our National Security Advisory Council is our Veterans for Smart Power initiative, which is made up of thousands of veterans from around the country who are committed to strengthening our non-military tools of national security. So we recently launched also our Farmers for Prosperity initiative, which is a network that brings together hundreds of agricultural leaders committed to leveraging resources to combat global hunger, strengthen U.S. export markets, and advance American business interests around the globe. And what brings all of these individuals and groups together is our shared recognition that America cannot afford to retreat from the world given everything that's at stake today. So we host events just like this around the country to listen, to learn, and to share about this critical work and why it's so important to our national and economic security. And no matter which party or person is in office, we work closely from administration to administration and with members of Congress, just like today with Congressman Herodopoulos. We do this through small in-district meetings or private roundtable conversations. We do this through, as I mentioned, events like this, and also through outreach during pivotal congressional votes. And we do this because strategic investments in U.S. international assistance, which is less than 1% of the total U.S. government spending, is essential to protecting our national security, keeping Americans healthy, and maintaining our economic edge and projecting the best of America's values. It's how we prevent terrorism, disease, and other threats from migrating to our shores. It's how we build partnerships and reach new markets to outcompete China. It's how we improve stability across fragile states through the delivery of food, medicine, and humanitarian relief. And according to a recent analysis by the International Monetary Fund, for every $1 we invest in international assistance and diplomacy, to prevent conflict, that saves us $103 in future crisis response costs. That's a pretty good investment when I look at that. It works on programs such as counterterrorism operations to combat ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, enable forward-deployed partner forces, contain and stabilize regional conflicts, and minimize risk for American men and women in uniform. After the Korean War, assistance helped move South Korea from economic collapse to now our 6th largest trading partner in the United States and a key ally for America today. And because of programs like Food for Peace, which on average has purchased more than $2 billion in agricultural products from U.S. farmers annually, more than 53 million people worldwide have accessed life-saving food aid, reducing susceptibility to extremist recruitment around the world while benefiting the American farmer and their communities. And of course, we have global health programs that address HIV, AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis, and has saved tens of millions of lives to curb the spread of infectious diseases around the world, including here at home, which strengthens global stability and keeps us healthy. And in the Northern Triangle, U.S. international assistance programs have helped reduce migration rates by up to 68% in targeted communities through programs focused on countering gang violence, disrupting the illicit drug trade, and building local economic opportunity. The international affairs budget is a strategic and cost-effective funds that help achieve U.S. goals abroad at far lower costs, both in lives and in dollars, than military engagements. As former Secretary of Defense James Mattis famously said, quote, "If you don't fund the State Department fully, then I have to buy more ammunition," end quote. So I want to thank all of you for showing up today for this important and timely conversation on how we all can help build a better world and a stronger, more prosperous America through strategic investments in diplomacy and international assistance. So now I will turn it back over to Congressman Yoho to introduce our speakers for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Carrie, thank you very much. Good words. It's now my pleasure to introduce our featured speakers, starting off with Joe Rice, is currently the Director of State and Local Government Relations at Lockheed Martin Space. Prior to his time at Lockheed Martin, he served in the Colorado House of Representatives and as the mayor of Glendale, Colorado, and I've been there. He is also an Iraq war veteran with over 32 years of combined active and reserve military service in the U.S. Army. Next is General Richard Newton, who I've had the pleasure of being with before, is a decorated veteran with over 34 years of experience in the U.S. Air Force. He most recently served as Assistant Vice Chief of Staff to the Air Force and Director of the Air Staff at the Pentagon, where he led thousands of service members and oversaw major defense operations. Since his retirement, he has held leadership roles on various advisory boards and has often appeared on News Nation as a senior national security contributor. And now, it's my great honor to introduce today's featured guest, Congressman Mike Herodopoulos. That's a hard word for me to say, I think because I don't have any hair, who is currently serving his first term representing Florida's Central Atlantic Coast in Congress. Hang on a minute. Representing the heart of the state's Space Coast. Congressman Herodopoulos is a member of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, good choice, where he serves as chair of the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee. He also sits on the Financial Service Committee, which is very important. Prior to his election to Congress, he served 3 years in the House of Representatives in Florida and 9 years in the Florida State Legislature, capping off his career in state politics as the president of the Florida Senate from 2010 to 2012. We're grateful to have Congressman Herodopoulos with us today to talk about how U.S. leadership around the world is critical for the security and prosperity of not just Floridians, not just the nation, but of the world. And afterwards, I'm going to bring Carrie Campbell back up, who will return to the stage to moderate today's conversation. But first, please join me in welcoming Congressman Herodopoulos to the stage.
Appreciate it, Congressman. Thanks. Yeah, when they pronounce my name and they're like, Haridopoulos, I said, no, Herodopoulos. And it works out just fine. Thank you so much, Ted. It's great to be here. And, I love a place as the chairman of the Space Committee where they have butter that's shaped like shuttles. I know I'm in the right place, without doubt. And I'm going to get right into it today because I think the most interesting part of the day is going to be the conversation we have up here together, talking about the future of not just the United States and how we handle so many competing challenges, but most importantly, of how we make the world a better place in general. That's why we're all here today. And it's something fascinating because one of the things that's really important to me is you want to act as we move through our lives. Does your work matter? What you do, does it matter? And that's one of the things I like to judge myself as we make our way through our different times in life. And does it matter not just for the work we do, but of course the family you raise. And so today I want to get right into where we are today by understanding where we were just a few years ago. Almost 16 years ago to the day, President Obama demolished what we knew as the space program. The shuttle went away, the Constellation project went away, and a lot of us wondered what was the future of Kennedy Space Center. Remember, it wasn't too long ago when we lost the Apollo program and Brevard County went right off the map for a period of time. And what the great news I have to report is that a lot of people in this room to thank, that you stepped up and created a new vision of what space will look like. And last Wednesday, we got to see the culmination of a hell of a lot of hard work where people put their minds together and created a whole new vision for space. It says a lot about our country that in meeting these challenges, we can do anything. And that's the kind of can-do spirit that really will make America the great country that it not only is, but will be even better. And that's why I'm excited to be back in Congress, back in politics, and understanding that it's the can-do nature of politics instead of a lot of this hubbub we see on TV every day. What we see on TV, I call it tribal warfare. If you're a Republican, you watch Fox. If you're a Democrat, you watch every other station. And the idea is people just want to hear what they already believe. And what I've called politics is the art of the possible. How do you move the ball? And we've seen that in the state of Florida. I see Senator Grahl here and others. They're doing amazing work. Everybody looks to Florida for leadership. Look at the contrast in the way Florida reacted to COVID and the rest of the nation. And if you haven't noticed in the latest kind of news is that people are leaving what they call blue states and moving to red states because they think there's more freedom and opportunity. Just the numbers are showing that. And I like that as a former political science teacher because the cool thing about a boring subject called federalism is people vote with their feet. And that's exactly what's happening right now. And that's why we're enjoying some incredible times in the state of Florida because people want to live here. And there's a reason why 10 million people came here illegally the last few years is because America is still the shining city on the hill. And we need to adjust to those challenges as we move forward. So in going back to the story about President Obama's decision to shatter the space industry as we know it, we were wondering what might happen next. But in the short term, think about it. We were in a space race with the Soviets a few years ago, and then we had to rely on that same country to get to our own space station. You talk about a radical paradigm change and why it's so important to have alliances and new creative ways of thought. But again, as I mentioned, because of the creativity of a lot of people in this room today, we met that challenge, and I think we even have greater ambitions than we did back in 2010. I mean, think about it right now. And as we grew up and we watched science fiction movies, and we always thought, I think there'll be some kind of moon colony. It's going to happen. And we're going to go to Mars because we have a moon colony. We have some amazing companies, including Lockheed Martin here today and others, that are putting a vision together so that America's best days are ahead, and everyone's rallying behind that call because they recognize how important space is. It's not just for the adventure. It's also for national security and the technological changes that have taken place in this world and more to come that we can't even envision yet. That's what's so exciting about being a part of this challenge today. And so as we talk about the idea of simply the word diplomacy, I think we all heard an incredible speech recently by our Secretary of State, former senator from Florida, former Speaker of the House here in the state of Florida, in Munich just a few months ago. And he laid out, I think, a very thoughtful vision. And I'll sum it up in a simple country song in this way: be a friend would like to have. That's a great way to not only go through life, but to deal with other countries. That's what America wants to be, but expects from their friends. This isn't a one-way relationship. This is everybody comes together and solves problems. We did it in a dynamic way when we formed NATO back in 1949 to make sure we stopped the threat of communism. Now we face brand new challenges with NATO as we are going through that debate as we speak. Because as we're in this recent conflict, we asked some of our friends, can we fly over your country? They said no. Well, we might have to reevaluate that conversation. So these are the kind of challenges that we're going to have. And because of organizations like yours today, we can have the kind of thoughtful conversations and what the next step holds for not only our country, but the world. Because there are groups of people out there, as we know, one of them is kind of Alderon, who will kill their own people and will martyr themselves in exchange for not moving towards what we consider freedom. And what's great about our Constitution, we didn't say the government gives you freedom. We believe in the idea that you're born free, and it's up to the Constitution to affirm that freedom. That's what's exciting to me. That's why I taught U.S. history classes all those years, to affirm, understand the foundational element that we created this country and where we need to move to affirm those amazing people who created the greatest country on earth. And so as we move forward, space is going to play a vital role. And I could not think of a better place to hold the lunch today, because space and the Artemis program, it's not just the USA. Remember, of those 4 astronauts, one of them is from Canada. And we beat them in hockey, by the way, this year. It was great. I can't believe that's the biggest applause line. Okay, good, whatever. Thanks. Yeah. But these are the challenges of the day. And what I would invite everyone to do is that whether you be Republican, Democrat, a lot more independents now in this country, is to keep your mind open in a couple of ways. One is understand where the other person is coming from. The old phrase of walk in someone else's shoes. Whenever I have a conversation, especially with a Democrat in the House where I serve today, I say, what's the mindset of this individual as they enter Congress? And where can I actually have a constructive conversation? I know full well I'm not going to have a constructive conversation with them about Donald Trump, and I'm not going to have a constructive conversation with them about probably on taxes or even school choice. But we can have a constructive conversation about the environment. We can have a constructive conversation about space. We can have a constructive conversation about finance. And I think world diplomacy as well. Because in the end, it's the United States who we took an oath to affirm in the Constitution and swear before our God. That's the exciting thing to me. And so what I've actively done in my first years in Congress now is to actively seek out Democrats who I think can work together beyond the politics that we see too often on television. And we owe it to you to do that very thing. And I'll close with this. I'm happy to report that on the issue that's so important to this community, the space industry, and increasingly important to the world, is that we did come together on the space budget. About a year ago in these rooms, I remember having conversations, and everyone thought the sky was falling again. Talk about 40% cuts at NASA, you name it. And my conversation back was, it's just beginning. It's not the end. And I'm happy to report that not only did we fully fund NASA, we gave an additional $9.9 billion to NASA, because when we had the longer conversation, people recognized that space is important to mankind, let alone the United States. Because again, it's not just an adventure, it is vital to our diplomacy around the world. And America is achieving better things if we work together, and that's what this whole Artemis mission is. It's not just the United States, and I'm thrilled to report that. And so we're working on things in space, and the last thing we talk about is this before we get into a great conversation. I look forward to getting the wisdom for those folks who really understand these in depth, is things like AI are what we call creative destruction in economics. And a lot of people are very concerned about the direction that AI could take us. But it's also an opportunity. And so one thing that I've created with a congressman out of California who happens to be a Democrat, we say, we got to make sure we take this issue off the partisan table. And so we have created a working group in Washington, D.C., where we are getting the world leaders in AI together in the same room, and we're having constructive conversations so it doesn't just go off on some radical partisan path. That's how you solve problems, when you have a constructive conversation and you walk in other people's shoes and you understand what they can do and what they can't do politically and work within those parameters. And so I'm thrilled to be here today. It's an exciting time. Later today, we're going to see those astronauts landing in the Pacific Ocean. I actually talked to them last night when they were on the Orion spacecraft. It's an amazing time to be an American, to be in the middle of this, and what an exciting place to be in the world today. Thank you very much. You spelled my name right. This is good. All right.
Good job. You get the hard questions.
Okay, I get the hard questions. Okay. Thanks, man.
Hey, Joe.
So, wow, let's just give another round of applause to your congressman here at Alpha. How wonderful. So we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A and a conversation up here. And depending on how much time we have left, we do have note cards on the table. We might not be able to get to them, but if we can't, we will work with our speakers today and get you some answers, and I will respond back. So please feel free to write on those note cards. So I'm going to start with just our opening question, ease into this a little bit. And Congressman, your story personally is really an interesting one. As the son of a Greek immigrant, it's given you a really unique perspective. I've had the opportunity to talk with you as a candidate, and then when you first got to DC, and I've enjoyed that conversation. But particularly your perspective on international affairs, given that you're the child of a Greek immigrant, combined with that broader commitment to public service you just spoke about. In your many years in the Florida legislature, now as the congressman in Florida's 8th congressional district, and not just on financial services, but the chair of the space subcommittee, which is really fascinating, serves this district so well. You really have a front row seat to the needs, not just of the people in this room in Space Coast, but Floridians and the country as a whole. So my question to you is how does your personal and professional experience, how has that shaped your perspective on why America's role in the world impacts our security and prosperity and well-being that you just talked about, and not just of your constituents, but for all of us?
Sure. Well, that's, first of all, I like this introduction. I bring her on the road with me. It'd be great. I really think of that in this basic way, whether you use a Ronald Reagan term, the shining city on the hill. I mean, America is this bastion of freedom and opportunity, and we are truly blessed. You think about being born anywhere in the world, and we're blessed to be Americans, and that opportunity that affords us, and we should never take that for granted, to say the least. There is a reason, as I mentioned briefly in my comments, why people want to come here and will do anything to not only come here but bring their children here because of the land of opportunity that it is. I mean, could you imagine living in a place like Iran where women have no rights whatsoever, where they kill their own citizens indiscriminately just in the name of power? And so I look at it in that regard, and I also look at it because of the training I've had growing up. I was a U.S. history teacher, and I understood the impacts that America has had on the world in a positive way and negative way. And so we need to find those opportunities. And I think what we looked at in previous generations, and we have such a big debate about immigration today, is that previous generations came here for the opportunity. And what has concerned a lot of people recently is that some people are coming here for the benefits. And that's been a real frustration, because when you see, especially with some of the fraud that's taking place in California and states like Wisconsin, you're saying, I work incredibly hard, and these people are, in essence, stealing money. And my government isn't stepping in to stop that fraud. And so that's the balance that we need to strike. Remember, we let in more immigrants than any other nation in the world. We have one of the most liberal immigration policies in the world. But we also need to respect, again, the sense of respecting the people who played by the rules. I wouldn't be surprised if there's people in this very room who came from another country, and if you want to do it legally, it costs you a heck of a lot of money, and it took you a lot of time to get through that process. And when people, in essence, cut in line, that becomes a challenge. And what makes this nation so unique is not the Constitution on its own, because a lot of nations have mirrored our Constitution. It's the actually enforcement of that Constitution, the rule of law. And so once we get away from that in the name of compassion, it can become a very slippery slope. So what I'm always trying to balance is how do we stick by our principles, but also respect those folks who have played by the rules. And that's the big immigration debate we're going to have today. But I know that the world will benefit when a lot of the immigrants come to America because they can get the capital and access to that capital and create ingenious ideas. We can point to so many immigrants who are changing the world as we speak, i.e. Elon Musk and others. That's the challenge, to find that right balance so that people know that when you do it the right way, you'll be rewarded. And when you, in essence, pay taxes, you'll be rewarded. And that's the balance I always try to think, as I mentioned before in my comments. Walk in other people's shoes and understand what they are going through and try to strike the balance that really makes a difference in people's lives.
And those root causes of migration that I talked about earlier, the 68% in those targeted communities, if we're doing that investment, for those that are looking to come to the United States to get away from gang violence or lack of opportunity, those investments help us do exactly what you're talking about. Would you agree with that?
Again, no doubt. I mean, again, we are a nation of immigrants. The Statue of Liberty is not a cliche, but I want to always stick with first principles, and that is the rule of law, accountability, and making sure that we strike that correct balance. Because again, we all want to give to others, don't get me wrong, but when you give something away, it cheapens those who on the other side. But it is essential that we continue that bastion of opportunity and strike that balance. And it's not an easy one to do, because you can, I would imagine just about every person who came across that border illegally, they have a story of limited opportunity. And that's what we need to be sympathetic towards.
So General Newton, I'm going to do a little bit of a hard pivot from this conversation to turn to you. And given your, what Congressman Yoho and all of your litany of experience, 34-year career in the Air Force, you've led thousands of men and women, both at peacetime and at times of crisis, and shaping our operations at the highest level of national defense. It really is an honor to be sitting here with you as well. But as you look back on your career, how do you see the tools of the civilian tools of diplomacy, international assistance playing a part in our foreign policy, including that I was talking about, the diplomatic, the economic, the humanitarian, the global health? How does that complement our military?
It actually doesn't complement it. I think it's essential. When you think of national security, we think in terms of the military tool, you think of the diplomatic tool, economic finance tool, we can get into that a little bit later, information tool. Those are now in 2026 much more integrated, much more synchronized. My dad, mom and dad were high school sweethearts in Fort Lauderdale. Dad woke up one day at West Point, had a career in the military, and ended up commanding the Air Force. I ended up kind of doing the same thing. I say that because what Dad experienced back in the Cold War, Korea, Cold War, and Vietnam, there was more of it's like a shell game. You had military here and diplomacy here and so forth, and they just weren't as integrated. And you're going to talk about when you were downrange, you know this for a fact, in places like Iraq, much more integrated, much more demandingly to be integrated and synchronized, and that aspect of it. So I think of diplomacy or foreign assistance really as a couple things. Number one, it's a force enabler, as well as extraordinarily enhancing to whatever the national security goal and objective is. Today, we're about to embark, actually tomorrow in Islamabad, you're going to have a U.S. team led by our Vice President Vance to engage with the Iranians, likely through a third party, Pakistan most likely, with really the wave of U.S. military capability that we've been engaging for the last 40 days. It's not that we just wake up one day, we said, okay, we're going to now switch to diplomacy, because my experience, lots of opportunities to be at the White House sit room and advising and doing things like that in my previous life, is more of a cornerstone now of trying to lead with the military or trying to lead with the diplomatic aspect of it. At the end of the day, it's about really enabling national security. Okay. And those tools, and Jim Mattis, Secretary Mattis, General Mattis, I've done with so many different hats on, when he said, and you quoted him, but he said, look, if we're not going to fully fund the State Department, is what he said, with foreign assistance, really the quote was, I'm just going to need more bullets. And so Jeej and I have a son-in-law who's Air Force Special Operations up in Hurlburt Field, just came back from his 7th combat deployment. And how many more tours of duty is he going to require? And that's just Robbie. Is it going to be number 8, 9, and 10, 11? Is there smarter ways for us to engage U.S. national security interests that's not necessarily just on a kinetic aspect, but a non-kinetic? Final point on that, it's not just one or two tools, but they're all working in a way that's integrated, synchronized, and we need to, I'll close on this, we need to continue, and you're a history teacher, God bless you for that. We need to develop our young men and women, our young Americans right now, to understand what it is to be more statesmanlike, to be more engaging in terms of, like you said, walk in another person's shoes, understand that, but have a perspective beyond just being slowly down the military line or the diplomatic line and so forth. The George C. Marshalls, the Dwight Eisenhowers, the Jim Mattises, the Buzz Mosleys, who was my chief, and so forth. Those men and women, Laura Richardson's a great example, the former commander of U.S. Southern Command. So how we're, not only it's in terms of the tools we have and the infrastructure and the hardware, but the people, I think, is the most important part. Creating them the opportunities, lead them to a point where they're developed and be able to think much more broadly than just one particular tool.
So Joe, I'm going to ask you to pick up on that a little bit. I have had the pleasure of calling you my friend for 10, 15 years. And so I know a little bit about your career when your service in Iraq, your service in Bosnia. You've led diplomatic exchanges between Americans and Iraqis. You now are at Lockheed Martin that employs 17,000 people in Florida, and I assume most of those are probably in this district. And so you've had this bird's eye view from many different lenses of how diplomacy and international assistance really are a part of our national civilian tools, both from a national security and an economic perspective. So just from a personal experience, what key moments would stand out from your career where you've seen these tools really impact not just our military, but also our economy and communities?
Thank you, Carrie, and it's an honor to be here with Congressman Herodopoulos, General Newton, and with all of you. What have I learned? I would say the power of individuals and organizations like the people in this room is what I learned, and I'll get to a specific example from Iraq in a moment. But I also kind of want to tee off of what Congressman Herodopoulos talked about, and many about Artemis, right? If you're here in Florida and here in the Space Coast, you are directly or indirectly contributed to that mission, right? You either worked on it, you retired, you built the institutions that enabled that to happen. Or even if you're construction, hotels, retail, a teacher, right? You have enabled the community that enabled that to happen. So really, I want to start with that it really does take communities and individuals. So in Iraq, I was there 5 times, total 3 years in 5 parts, and all of those, I had some interaction with the Iraqi security forces, so the Iraqi army, the Iraqi police, in enabling those institutions to stand up. Some of it was out on the streets, out at checkpoints, kicking in doors with them. Some of it was in the kind of institutional development. And that's what I want to focus on, where individuals and people in this room can play a role in those sorts of things. If you go back in history and look at the history, we built the Iraqi security forces 3 times. They collapsed completely the first 2 times in the first few years. And I think what we learned from that was you can train a policeman, you can train a soldier in a few weeks. You can train a pretty good soldier and a pretty good policeman in a few weeks. And the vast majority of these people were trying to do the right things. But they didn't have the institutional development around them. And so a lot of things happened that enabled it to be more effective the 3rd time. And you can look at where they are now, and at least they are effective, right? We're no longer providing security in that nation and policing the streets. They are. So there's some degree of effectiveness, and I think it's generally an upward trend. One of the things that implemented that was, yes, we had the soldiers, yes, we had the expert police trainers from around the world, but we started to connect, amazing things happened. We started to connect the people that were in Iraq there, training the Iraqi police, or the Iraqi soldiers, with people back home. And these wild connections would just spontaneously happen. If there's one of the soldiers, his wife is a school teacher. Well, this Iraqi policeman, their wife is a school teacher. And just how those intercultural connections and what can they learn, right? Because I think you mentioned the Constitution. I love that because so many people, read the Constitution of the old Soviet Union. It's a magnificent document, but it was never it was never breathed life into. And it takes those individual human connections. And so I have been at luncheons like this before, sitting at tables, and people are like, well, I came for the speaker, it was interesting, or I want, there's some reason I found myself here, but this is not something I can play a part of. And I want to assure you, one, you already are in the Space Coast, right? I covered that. You already are. Artemis is part of you. It really is, if you're anywhere here in the Space Coast, directly and indirectly. And I think those same things can happen with USGLC. And there's other ways to do it too. Faith groups, Rotary clubs, other ways to do it. But certainly I hope that something will change in you by coming here today, learning information, as Congressman Herodopoulos talked about it, and others, and that you'll stay involved and really realize the power that your connection can have all the way around the world through individual relationships as well as organizational relationships.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This is why I'd bring Joe on the road all the time. So I mentioned that I was going to start with some opening, light questions, and now that's done. So I'm going to turn a little bit I'm going to turn to national security. And as we all know, over the past several weeks, the United States has conducted strikes across Iran alongside our partner Israel. And since this military operation began, Iran's leadership and military has been decimated, creating a potential opening for peace in this region. So, easy question for you, Congressman. Where do you see the targeted international assistance that we're talking about and that sustained development that you mentioned in your remarks? How do you see those tools playing a role in ensuring that our recent military gains translate in long-term stability and security, not just for Iranians, but all of the Middle East? And how do you see that playing a role? I saw an interview with General Petraeus who said right now it's all about hard power. Medium, long term, it's going to be about soft power. So I'm just curious of your perspective on that.
Nice, easy question. Good. Let me say this. I think what really happens is you think about the neighborhood of the Middle East. Look what's happened in a very short period of time. There used to be almost unified anger or hatred towards Israel. You talk about the war in 67, 73, you name it, right? And look how it has changed radically. That UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, all these nations, they said, we have had enough of Iran. They only care about power projection and defeating the enemy and care little for their own people. And so they have made a very challenging decision given the makeup of the folks they represent and said, we're going to side, in essence, with the great Satan, you'd call that many years ago, and let alone Israel, against a fellow Islamic country. I mean, that's a big freaking deal. And how that plays out is very important. And this is, I think, incredibly important why I think NATO needs to assist in this effort, because having that pressure there is essential. And I think that, as you put, the soft power projection is happening. I mean, think about the economic ties we're making with these Middle Eastern countries, the trillions of dollars of investment that President Trump, to his credit, he's a unique diplomat, I will say that. He tweets not like I do, but it's you could tell it's for a reason, right? And so that said, I think that the neighborhood has changed. And we are, I think, literally a click away, meaning if we can dismantle this apocalyptic leadership clique that's in Iran right now, that the people of Iran want to return to 1979 more than they want to continue this chaotic regime that exists. And I don't know how exactly you do it. I'm not Marco Rubio right now, and I don't envy his position right now. But it is an opportunity here, because I talked to, they called themselves not necessarily Iranians, they called themselves Persians. And they're saying, we want to live in freedom. We want to practice the religion of our faith. And this regime has power over us because they have the guns and we don't. If there was an election in Iran, those folks would not be in power. So I think that what we need to do, and this is why I'm so excited to serve with my panel members today, I want to understand better how we can project not just the soft power, but use all the different tools that we have to mitigate the situation in a thoughtful way that brings peace to the region. Because the people who actually live in Iran, they don't want this war. They know that they should be one of the richest countries in the world, given the resources that they're blessed with naturally. And instead, too many of them live in poverty. And candidly, women live without rights in Iran. And shame on them. And so we are in the right morally here. How we maneuver the other parts is a whole nother story, because, and I'll close with this because I'd much rather hear from the folks here. But one last thing, remember, we're not the ones who are buying a lot of the oil from the Middle East today. It's China and India that need this strait to be open even more than we do. And remember, we're moving towards more energy independence because of our new relationship with Venezuela and our belief in bringing back fossil fuels in America. So I want to hear from the experts myself, because I have a historical perspective, but I know the people of Iran want to live free. They do not want to live under this regime. And the sad thing is that this small clique of leaders is depriving not only the world of freedom, but their own people of freedom.
So the congressman asked y'all the question, General Newton. So how do you see these civilian tools and the soft power approach creating sustained wins in the Middle East?
It's like 12 years ago, having testified in the House and the Senate a number of times. Your predecessors, Ed, also. You know, the Middle East has changed forever. It took 7 administrations to do what President Trump has done in this administration. It's not just President Trump, it's the entire team that includes the military as well as key members of the cabinet and, frankly, the brunt of the nation, bringing power to bear against this theocratic regime since November of 1979. I remember I was at pilot training in Del Rio, Texas, and I was flying with 100 Iranian pilots. And in March of 1979, they woke up literally in the middle of the night, and they were, because of the Islamic Revolution, they were people without a country, or come home or we're going to slaughter your family. They're selling their vehicles, they're asking for their families, their wives, and their kids to be able to stay in our homes and so forth. It made a big impact on me, frankly, back then. Fast forward to now, I'm frankly, I'm encouraged by the solidarity between the United States and Israel. Think about it. This is the first time we have had a joint combined campaign between Israel and the United States, and look at the effectiveness of that campaign militarily. Absolutely. We talk about the other tools, though. Let's throw in the diplomatic tools and other aspects of U.S. national power. What makes me nervous is the fact that we decided to cease and desist of the extraordinary successful military campaign today and to go into a ceasefire negotiations. Why? Because Iran holds the cards with regard to the Strait of Hormuz. They do not own the strait. They control the strait. And by controlling the strait, they are able to deter global shipping, and you mentioned it. 20% of the world's oil, 20% of the world's liquid natural gas, which also means fertilizer and aviation fuel, passes through the strait. 80% of that customer base is China, right? India, South Korea, and Japan, and a little bit of Europe along the way. And so the impact that can have on the global economy and the asymmetric aspect of what Iran's doing to control that strait and really control the outcome potentially of this campaign is extraordinary. We'll find out. J.D. Vance is going to lead our team at Islamabad tomorrow. I'm not confident that the ceasefire will ensue and last. I think the only ability or the only means for us to really end the regime is what it started out for. And that is the United States to go after the Iranian retaliatory capability with regard to their ballistic missiles and their drones and their nuclear weapons development capability. No, we didn't finish it on the night of June 22nd with my former B-2s and Tomahawk cruise missiles and Midnight Hammer. We still have some work to do there. The other aspect of this is we need to ensure that they're no longer able to be the largest exporter of terrorism in the world with Hezbollah, which is still a problem with Israel in the north of Israel, in the southern part of Lebanon. Hamas, yes, they still have weapons. Yes, they still control Gaza City. I was just in Gaza just a couple months or so ago. I saw it firsthand. And the Houthis. We haven't heard from the Houthis yet. But if they decide to choke off the Red Sea, where 12 to 15% of global commerce goes through the Red Sea, that's going to be even more significant. What am I leading up to here? What I'm leading up to here is it still is going to take United States leadership, period, dot. And based on that leadership, it's going to take diplomacy for us to lead allies, lead allied organizations such as NATO and others. We can't do it alone. The enemy gets a vote in that. We weren't able to do it in the Cold War. We weren't able to do it certainly through Vietnam, although that was a failure, frankly. We weren't able to do it under the Reagan era, and so forth. And so I think allies are going to be more and more important. And I think diplomacy is going to play a much more significant role. Let's get the kinetic work done, which means destroying Iranians' retaliatory capability. Let's also continue to destroy their leadership through the auspices of the Israeli Defense Forces. And let's destroy the regime infrastructure so that the Iranian people can choose to take back their country. That's what, behold, I'll close on this point because I could talk for hours on it, and I have been on air constantly since February 28th. I know you've been on News Nation also, I've seen it. We have got to maintain leadership in this. We cannot let Iran maintain control of the Strait, come to their own successful conclusion. I'm concerned about Iran, yes. I'm more concerned about Putin in Moscow. I'm more concerned about Xi in China. The long-term consequences of what we're going to take forth here in Iran is going to have much more global impact. And that's where I think our leadership, both in military, diplomatic, economic, finance, and information, all those working together is going to be a key point.
So I'm going to ask a question of y'all. Y'all didn't know that y'all are part of this panel. How many of you have heard of the America First Global Health Strategy? Anyone? Hopefully you're going to walk away with this. So this is the Trump administration and Secretary Rubio's new agenda to protect Americans' health and stop dangerous diseases from spreading. You heard in my opening remarks, we talked about that. I mentioned that a few times. And we also know that these investments help save lives, and President Trump has actually made this extremely bold commitment with the help of the private sector of ending mother-child transmission of HIV by the end of his second term. We wish him all the best and want to be a partner in working with that. But this is some of the work that our global health investments take on. And so, Congressman, I'm going to ask you about your perspective on these global health investments. And given the Ebola outbreak in West Africa from a decade ago, of course, leading up to COVID reaching our shores not too long ago, we know that the next disease is just a plane ride away. Mm-hmm. And given that you're here at Space Coast and you have Port Canaveral with a bunch of people on ships coming in and out, this is a vulnerable area for potential ground zero in the United States. And so I would love to hear from you of why you think American leadership is so critical to stop these disease threats before they reach Florida or our shores anywhere.
Well, I wish my wife was here. That'd make it a little bit easier. She's actually the chief of staff to the Surgeon General now, as you know. So she runs the show on that part, among others. But I do want to get your take as well on that previous question, if you don't mind. I think this is one area where George W. Bush was underappreciated. Remember what he did for AIDS funding in Africa. I mean, radically for the positive change the future of Africa, because he made a huge investment. And of course, he brought public-private partnerships in and changed things. This is that next level, all right? And this shows the compassion that is the United States of America. And you know, we always theorize, we watch movies with Dustin Hoffman about outbreaks and so forth. We lived through it. And of course, different states handled it in very different ways. And it's the reason why we need to have our tentacles out in the world and understand some of these global threats so it does not disrupt our very way of life, let alone destroy economies, and most importantly, destroy or eliminate people. And the death toll is just horrific. This is why we have these type of outreach. And again, I think it really points to the compassion that is the United States of America and how we're trying to be those partners. And these are those soft things, as you put it so well, that we do. And I don't want to, and I know I've griped on this a little bit, but it also needs to make sure that when we put these resources out there, that it's getting into the hands of the people that utilize these dollars most effectively. I mean, we've all heard about these NGOs that are not doing those right things. And what you don't want is to eliminate all NGOs. You can't just cast aspersions on all, but it is incumbent upon us that if we're trying to do compassionate things, you respect the people who made that money possible, and then you put the resources in the right hands. And what was so intriguing to me about things like AI and the technological revolutions that we're seeing before our eyes and changing since we've been here is that the power of information should solve many of these issues. I mean, I know that, I mean, Aaron Grahl, a dear friend of mine, just a really smart person in the House, now Senate, understands is that the power of information is exactly that. And so I literally typed in and said, hospices in Florida, are there some concentrations in certain parts of the state? Maybe there's fraud there, right? Because we're seeing some of these things. The same thing needs to be held true. The power of information should allow us to look at an NGO that says how much of that NGO's money goes to the people truly at risk as opposed to the other. And because we are compassionate people, everyone in this room, Republican, Democrat, Independent, are more than willing to make that investment. But when we hear people abuse our generosity, it takes away that help that we want to provide. And so I think this is a great initiative. And if we do it the right way, unfortunately, they're not just issues in Africa, they're around the world that exist. And I'll close with this. One thing that is exciting, and it bolsters what we believe, I think, inherently, look what's happening in places like Bolivia and Argentina right now. They've been ravaged by inflation for generations now, I think since the 1930s. They have finally said, you know what, the free market's a better way to go. And look at the changes that are happening there. And I hope that we do much the same way here in America. I'm not a libertarian, but I am a person who believes that there's a role for government, but we need to free up these markets. And that's what's going to, because Europe's going the opposite direction, and you see how their economic growth is falling off a cliff. And so we need to promote these ideas. And again, this is the great example of soft power, that we are thinking logically, we're helping people desperately in need, and that can only be a great investment for our future. And we'll start to change the hearts and minds because China, with their Belt and Road projects, are trying to do much the same.
Can I follow up real quick? Sorry.
Actually, real quick, before you do, I just want to reference what you mentioned about George W. Bush's investment and the program. The program is called PEPFAR, President's Emergency Preparedness for AIDS Relief. And I think it's just such a startling success story that I want to make sure that I share it. And since its inception, which was, 25, 30 years ago, it has literally saved 30 million lives. And this is just one example of how smart investments help America win. So
Created 30 million consumers as well, right?
Excellent point. I took a U.S. GLC senior team from the Trump administration to Zambia. Saw that exactly what you just said, Carrie. And it's had broad impact. Why is that important to me? Because it's on my son-in-law's 8th combat deployment. He doesn't have to go do counterterrorism in places in southern Africa and so forth. Final point is that what you mentioned also, this nexus, when I was in Gaza, literally just a couple months or so ago, I went in through Rafah, then up into the southern central part as Israel was taking in their 2 divisions into Gaza City. But who was there? Samantha's Purse. And they were sponsored by the U.S. Embassy team, led by then Ambassador Huckabee, or now Ambassador Huckabee. It was an extraordinary display of U.S. power, soft power. And what you just said is spot on. And nothing in the world could we have done as effectively kinetically, or Israel for that matter, done anything. But the soft power and what we're really trying to beat the drum here with U.S. Global Leadership Coalition is find ways that we can enhance U.S. national security, yes, but make the world a better place, yes, so we don't have to go back and deal with it 10 years from now.
do it effectively.
Absolutely.
Transparent about the spending.
And absolutely. And Samantha's Purse, and it could have been anyone else, but they were again supported by United States Foreign Assistance. Boom.
So Joe, you got a couple of questions sitting
Yeah.
on your lap. One is going back to the question about international assistance and diplomacy in helping the Middle East stabilize, as well as just your military experience in the global health.
I'll give you my personal observations for both, right? It's not from the policymaker level. But for global health, right, not only do we think, many of us think it's the moral thing to do, right? It's also the self-interest thing to do, right? Infections spread. And then, of course, I don't want to gloss over the point, well, I know we reinforced it, creating 30 million consumers, right? As opposed to 30 million casualties. Stability in the world is good for economic trade, right? They can put their money into other things and create other economic value. And then then I just want to quickly touch on the space program and bring it home to the Space Coast here. So many nations are creating space agencies now. And many of them are looking here. We've brought delegations to Florida to meet with Space Florida and others about how to create a space agency. And some of these are the smallest, poorest countries, but they're starting to get to that point where they see the value of the space technologies that many of us here are part of. And then, of course, they also, you can do soil moisture from space. You can look at insecticide and where you need it and where you don't from space and from drones and other things. So I think it really is global health. I mean, it ties to space as well, I think, is that point. And Congressman, but just really, since I've not been on News Nation, but I'll try to play my a part here. From my personal observations, when you were talking about, we have to talk to our allies. Sometimes we have to hold our allies accountable, but it's a conversation, right? And it reminds me of going down to the tactical level at combat outposts in Iraq. And by the way, some of them were right in the middle of Baghdad and other large cities, Mosul. Almost all my time was in Baghdad, but also out there. Well, of course, anytime you have a combat outpost, you've got areas around the combat outpost. And so this is where I think the power of relationships. I wrote a paper for the Center for Army Lessons Learned. It was a small part of many other people's work that led to some doctrinal shifts, because the short version is there were commanders who took kind of an iron fist to the areas around. Like, if there's an IED outside my gate, I'm holding you, community leader, Iraqi police captain, sheikh, I'm holding you responsible. And what we did is we forced some of those people into the bad guys' camp. If you force them to make a stand, then sometimes they're going to go the other way. If we gave, and you got to evaluate each one individually, but if we gave them a little bit of space, because oftentimes we found people that were complicit with the enemy and the insurgents, and we needed to deal with them, but we also found a lot of people that, hey, look, when we walked away, other people with AK-47s walked in, right? And they stayed there all night with them. So they had to, they weren't free to make their own choices, going back to freedom again, and personal safety. But for those that we would work with and try to give them as much space to be as influential as they could, building the relationship, those areas suffered lesser casualties than the places that tried to really police it and come down draconian. That was math and other anecdotal observations. So I think that's my comment. And so I think it comes back to the fact that you talked about how there's people in Congress you disagree with, but you look for what can we agree on. I think that is too limited of too few people are doing that. So I commend you for that, and I think your district, the state, and the nation and the world benefits from that kind of thing, and that's what I saw in Iraq, and that's what I think that you're talking about doing here.
Thank you.
So I'm going to turn to a space question in a minute, but there's something that's really important that really impacts the ability to do space travel, and that's critical minerals. And the Trump administration is refining the interagency strategy to secure reliable sources of critical minerals with low-cost wraparounds, investments, alongside sustained diplomatic efforts, and that's going to be key to combating China, because we know China is resourcing critical minerals as well. So General Newton, from your lens of sitting in the sit room in the past in the Pentagon, can you tell me, as the Pentagon works to secure the critical minerals supply chain, what unique capabilities do the State Department play and other international affairs agencies? How do they bring support to that effort to ensuring we have those critical minerals that help us build those rockets and talk on our cell phones and everything else that we do and rely on?
Relationships. And relationships not only in nation states, but relationships in groups. I've discovered that what's even more challenging, we think we're going to be dealing with a nation state of fill in the blank, but really it could be groups that are inside that nation state they really have to deal with. The long-term careers of our diplomats, and I'm not being polite here, I've been the benefit of those relationships, can really, really make things happen. You were in the civil affairs world in Iraq, you saw that as well. If we're just relying on the military aspect of it, I think I would also add to there not only with regard to state or foreign assistance or diplomats, but also the intelligence community. There's a strong capability inside the State Department that has its intelligence base as well. It also goes back to the sharing of information. One of the biggest challenges we had inside the national security infrastructure that I participated with on 25-hour days. By the way, Senator Rubio, now Secretary of State Rubio, is also National Security Advisor Rubio. How many of those have we ever had in our nation's history? One, called Henry Kissinger. So the Henry Kissinger of this era is Marco Rubio. That's something for all of us to be very proud of, regardless if you're, Lutheran, Catholic, or Presbyterian, or whomever. I'm being facetious there. But the point is that I think, as I tried to allude to in my previous commentary, is in today's world, in the nature of your question, if we're going to find, fix, target, and acquire those strategic minerals, it's not going to be one particular agency. It's not going to be one particular type of capability. And the fact is, you mentioned China. China, we're embroiled with Iran right now. We're challenged with Ukraine and Russia with regard to that largest land invasion since World War II and so forth. But the pacing horse for United States national security is China. Period. Dot. And I won't get it on my 1 to 10 scale, but China is definitely a 10, and so that's a challenge. And you allude to in the question again, Gary, things we don't think about. We think about in terms of space, we think in terms about aircraft, we think in terms about how many ships and that type of stuff. At the end of the day, it's going to be strategic minerals. And where we're able to garner and control that high ground of strategic minerals will really set the pace for us in our national security. We don't need or want or can we afford to have China set that pace.
So picking up on that, Congressman, I would love to hear how Congress can help use all the tools, including these programs that we're talking about here today, in order to help the supply chains and access those critical minerals.
Well, I mean, one classic example is the issue we're talking about with Pakistan. And a lot of people are like, how the hell did Pakistan get in the middle of this? And how are they the one potentially negotiating this? Because they have trillions of dollars right now of rare earth minerals, right? And that's why they're a player. And they have come in and exerting themselves in the world stage, which no one thought potentially possible. And so I think that's the reality of it all. And as I mentioned briefly, the Belt and Road of China, they are playing games where they'll go in and hand out the goodies, and then when the bill comes due, they say, well, you stole us money, we're taking your minerals. And so we fell behind, candidly, as you know, and we're playing catch up with these different nations, trying to create the relationship so these rare earths are possible. Whether you believe in oil and gas or electric cars, if you don't have these rare earths, you can't compete. And so we have to look at it in a constructive way, and I think that, to the General's point, I'm proud to know Mark Rubio for 27 years now, and I think he's maybe like the new Dolphins coach too soon. So it's amazing. I love these pictures of him on the couch. He's like a new guy every week. But it's rare that we have someone this capable. And one of the things, when he ran for president the first time in 2016, a lot of people was he ready yet, right? Now I think he is. And I remember I sat with him about 2 years ago before I ran again, and just walking him. He encyclopedic of the different nations of the world and understanding not only the issues there, but to your point, and your point, Joe, the relationships that are necessary so you can engage in a real conversation. I mean, remember, we're really good at winning battles now. Can we win the peace? Mm-hmm. So you look at, for example, we did pretty well in the American Revolution. We really won the peace. We did really well militarily in Vietnam. We lost the peace. And asked Woodrow Wilson how we lost the peace in World War I, too. So these two components are hand in hand and so essential. We have the greatest fighting force in the world, including our son, who's in the Air Force. But we need capable people who can win the peace. And the only way you win the peace is by not only the power of information, but the power of relationships. And that's why it's so essential we keep these doors open and don't allow ourselves to be flippant with other nations, because many years ago, Pakistan. Now Pakistan's a big freaking deal. So this is how, again, when you treat people with respect, even when you disagree, the doors are still open. But when you start shutting them, the good news is that China has not treated a lot of these nations with the respect. They did the first day, and they didn't treat them so well on date number 11. And they're looking for new alternatives. And this is our opportunity, because China has overplayed their hand, I think. They're going through their own issues. But I agree with the General. They are our number one threat. And if we're not careful, they will control those rare earths. And that's why, going back to space, helium-3 is a big deal. For those who don't know, helium-3 is a potential opportunity for nuclear power, which reduces potentially the cost for things like data centers, AI, et cetera.
that was a really detailed answer. Thank you very much. No, I appreciate it.
Nerding out, I apologize.
Not only a history major, but he's a scientist.
Exactly.
AI is great now.
So maybe
I
you
read
can
on the
teach me
weekends.
afterwards. So we are coming up on time, but I do have a closing question, but I would certainly be remiss, given where we're sitting, both the district and the venue, to not ask a question related to space and development and diplomacy. So I have to obviously go to Lockheed Martin with the space question, but I'll come to you, General and Congressman as well. So Lockheed Martin is sort of one of the epitomes of companies that are involved in space and benefits from the work of our diplomats and policy leaders. I was actually fascinated to learn about the Artemis Accords and how many countries signed on to the Artemis Accords and the role that there was a connection between international assistance, diplomacy, and space. And so I wonder if you can just talk about those partnerships, that cooperation, particularly in African countries, and how does this ultimately boost innovation and help Americans win?
Sure, absolutely. And of course, tonight, right, the Artemis splashdown scheduled for 8:07 p.m. So
Yay.
watch that. And many of us are very pleased with how the mission has gone so far, but we're not going to relax until the parachutes are open, the astronauts have safely splashed down. So hopefully that'll happen tonight. And of course, Lockheed Martin plays a key role in that, but there are so many others, right? Boeing here, dozens and dozens of companies, right? Artemis is a U.S.-led international effort, right? It is going back to the moon, onto Mars, absolutely a U.S.-led, NASA-led international effort, but it's bigger than any one company and any one country, and that's where the Artemis Accords come in. And I think, again, the leadership of the United States in developing the Artemis Accords, so Google that if you're not familiar with it. Like many of you are probably more familiar than me, but it's laying out the roadmap for the exploration of space, back to the moon and onto Mars. 61 countries have signed this U.S.-led international effort. By the way, Russia and China have their own coalition as well. Not as many countries, but they do have a coalition of countries. And looking ahead, again, getting to China being a great geopolitical competitor here, we are going to have a moon base in a few years. There will be a moon base in a few years, as Congressman Herodopoulos said. So think about that. Isn't that pretty exciting? So very simply, picture a moon base. Now picture a Chinese flag flying over that moon base. That is what is at risk here. And that is what Congressman Herodopoulos, the Trump administration, others are trying to get us caught up to where we need to be able to have that U.S.-led international effort. It's more than just pride. It's more than even just competition, right? It's the values that shape space exploration and how things are going to be used out there. Think about, just one quick example, right? The air traffic control system of the world. Why is English the international language of air traffic control? Why is the system set up according to U.S. standards and all that? Because we set up the system. And I think that's the same kind of thing we want to do and is important that we do for outer space. So again, that's just the Artemis Accords. Africa, I already mentioned that so many nations, including in Africa, setting up space agencies. And the value of space, it enables economies, number one. Think about, GPS is not just getting from here to there. Cybersecurity is dependent on it. So much commerce is dependent on it. Many African nations are leaping over landlines, right, and going to these other kinds of things that are space-enabled. So it's a critical for the development in Africa. And again, all of that, the epicenter of aerospace, the aerospace economy, national security for aerospace is right here on the Space Coast.
So
that doesn't just happen, by the way. It takes continued leadership.
So very quickly, Congressman, as we're coming up on time, I just want to hear from you, given that this is your district and it's such an economic driver in your district, what can Congress do to support the Trump administration, particularly given your subcommittee chair on space? What can Congress do to help our space efforts, particularly through the State Department and some of the issues that we've been talking about today?
Well, I think Joe brought up a great point. These are Artemis Accords. And by the way, when we had the launch last Wednesday, invariably 10 different congressmen came at me individually. You have the coolest district. And I was like, I agree. I really agree. But again, this is that outreach that's so important. I mean, you can't help but be inspired by what happened last Wednesday. And God help us, everything goes successfully tonight around 8 o'clock. And these people are just amazing individuals. I mean, you talk about competition to be an astronaut. I mean, the competition between it is just remarkable. And so, you know, and as Joe brought up, the Chinese, they have alliances. I mean, I don't know, we called them the Axis in World War II, and I guess James Bond, we'll call them Spectre now. I mean, they're bad actors. And they don't share our values. And the moon thing's a big deal, to Joe's point. It's not just about a flag, but there's helium-3, and there's also, we think, on the South Pole, water. And that's the propellant, hydrogen and oxygen, that will launch us to Mars someday without the gravitational pull of Earth. And that's, again, a changing dynamic. And so what I'm so pleased about is that because Artemis, you know, few more hours to go, is a big success. That was, I did 55 interviews, I think, on Wednesday, and this is the linchpin. If Artemis 2 works, we have a real gateway opportunity here to really have a big run. And now that we have done that, and then you have a really dynamic leader in Jared Isaacman. I mean, this guy could be doing anything. He's a billionaire, and he chooses to engage in space. He understands where the future is. And AI, I mean, think about Elon Musk talking about potentially we'll have AI data centers in space, so you reduce the cost radically of electricity that it could harm because no one wants a data center in their backyard. So I'm able to go now back to Congress like we did last year and say, you guys made the investment, $34 billion instead of $24 billion, right? We need to continue that sustained effort, and I think it's approximately 20 to 30 billion that we're going to spend. And that's a lot of money, but it's also, we found out sadly and recently in states like Minnesota, we might have spent $14 billion on fraud. So the money's there, and the savings potential is there, and the value of putting our flag, setting the standards like you talked about air traffic control matters, just like setting the standards for AI matters. If it's the information that we lay out, we change the world. If we work off the Chinese AI system, almost like going to their foreign money instead of the dollar, we're in a bad spot here. And so this is our opportunity. We need to make the investment. And there's technologies we never even dreamed of because we have to do so many dynamic things to be successful in space. So I am thrilled. I hope sense my excitement for being a part of this mission together. And this community, as I open my comments today, what a radical positive change has happened since the president destroyed the space industry in 2010, and how dynamic this community is to rebuild it, and in places like not just Florida, but Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, and California. And it's just exciting. I see Colonel Chapman back there. I mean, what they're doing on the range right now here and in Vandenberg is just remarkable. And so couldn't be more excited to be here. And the sky is the limit. This is the place where we're literally taking off every few hours, it seems like now.
Literally. At the hotel earlier today, people were coming in to watch a rocket launch, so it's fun to see that, the excitement, particularly for young children. So our time is coming to a close, so I'm going to, in fact, we're almost past time, so I'm going to ask one closing question. I'm going to ask you all to give me 30 seconds or less to answer the question. I'm on time. And the closing question is, we've talked a lot today about different countries. We've talked about countries in Africa, Central South America. We've talked about competition with China, critical minerals, global health. And we've just scratched the surface. We never got to economic security as part of national security, and there's so much more to talk about. We could be up here for days. So my closing question to each of you in 30 seconds or less, how would you say that our civilian tools of international assistance and diplomacy make Florida's 8th Congressional District win and make America win as a whole? So I'm going to start with you, Joe.
The space industry, right? It continues to grow, right? We're adding up to 300 more jobs here for a fleet missile program. You got all the growth in the civil, commercial space, international space. You had what, Congressman, you just outed an Italian company a couple days ago that located here in Florida. So these are international relationships that touch on space, economics, all of that.
That's great timing. That was 30 seconds or less.
I got 20. $72 billion last year, Florida was involved with foreign trade. 1 in 5 jobs in the state of Florida is part of foreign trade. Foreign trade, foreign assistance, U.S. national security, it's not at the federal level, state level, and definitely at the local level. And you're right, you've got the most kick-ass Congress in the United States right now. Let's keep this thing going, because what is happening here in the Space Coast matters.
Wonderful. I'm just going to tack onto that just one second, because I can't help but say it, is the trade that the state of Florida does 7 of the 10 top trading partners for the state of Florida alone were once recipients of the money we're talking about here in that international assistance. So to what you said earlier about going from being a recipient to becoming a donor or providing economic opportunities for Americans is exactly what we're advocating for. So thank you for mentioning that. Congressman, close us out.
I would just say that you control what you can control. And we have the port people here. That's an amazing place, #1 in the world. We have space, #1 in the world. We need to focus on what we do best, and those are 2 amazing industries that we do best. And that's how we can make our impact to attract people from around the world and celebrate what America's all about.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists.
Good job.
Real quick, I'm gonna
Gas, let's do
do a quick close, gentlemen. So before I turn it over to Congressman Yoho to close us out, I just want to say a couple of quick thank yous. I want to thank the staff at the Kennedy Center. They've been wonderful to work with, very appreciative of them. I want to say thank you to my colleagues, both my colleagues here and those that are watching online. I really appreciate all you've done to help. And I also want to thank your staff. Been a pleasure, Hannah, Pam. I know I'm going to leave some people out, so I apologize, but they have been an absolute pleasure to work with, and I understand why you are as successful as you are.
Women around me.
Thank you very much. So, Congressman.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And Joe, I know you got a hard stop. You got a plane to catch. If you need to leave, feel free to leave, but if you want to stick around.
Let's see, guys. I gotta catch a plane. Yeah, thanks, guys.
Do well.
So we want to thank Congressman Herodopoulos, General Newton, and Mr. Rice for an insightful discussion. Give them a round of applause again. The best part of serving as a USGLC Florida co-chair is working with leaders like all of you that really bring industry and government together and help set policies. As a former member of Congress, I can tell you firsthand how you have the ability to make an impact by sharing your support for these programs. I can't tell you, when you guys came up to our office and we talked, things happen. So never be shy of going up and see your representatives. And on that note, save the date for USGLC's annual Impact Forum in DC. It's a 2-day event of incredible conversations and the opportunity to speak with your members of Congress on Capitol Hill. It's going to be June 2nd and 3rd. Carrie will share more information with that. And share what you've learned today with your networks and let people know what USGLC and how important it is. And again, I can't thank you enough for being here. It's been a great meeting. It's been an honor to see y'all. Take care.